Hello, everybody, and welcome to a conversation with artist Stephen Guenther. He is exhibiting in the 7th annual Evanston Made member show and pop-up, which is online this year for the first time. Hello, Stephen. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Lisa. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. This is a super fun opportunity for people who can't meet you in person at your artist talk or art reception to get to know you and your work a little bit. So first, tell us about the piece that you have in the exhibit.
Yeah, there were a series of photographs. I mean, if you look at my work, there's a lot of water. I'm very attracted to water, the colors, the flavor, the environment, and those were they're actually shot underwater. And I've been a diver a lot of my life, and near the surface, the colors are extraordinary. And if you're in an area like the Caribbean, the water and the sky merging and the colors are beautiful. So those were actually shot, it's just a few feet underwater, looking at the waves and the motion and the colors and the light reflecting through. They've always attracted me since I was a kid and snorkeled. And there's just a visceral response to it that, they're almost snapshots in a funny sort of way, because you can't time the water and the waves and the light. So they're just a lot of fun.
And
I think of them as sketches in a funny sort of way.
Well, and yeah, so in some of the images, you're either submerged or you're above the water, or are you always inside the water for those photos?
Both. There's some that are done under the water, but obviously, your breath is an issue. But I'm in water that's maybe 4.5 feet deep. So the brightness of the sand bounces light on the underside of the water. So I'm able to sort of just hold the hands down and do a series of shots, and then look at them and see what I like, and then go back. It's kind of fun. So.
They're absolutely stunning. They're so beautiful. Tell us what you're working on right now. What is your camera pointing at, or what are you printing?
Well, there's, as you know, there's a series that were shot in the Bahamas called Suiseki, and I'm in the process of printing those, sort of going through roughly 3,000 images, trying to get it down to 12. And it's a nightmare, because one day you like this, and then 3 days later you're like, oh, I didn't even see that one. How about that one? But it's also finding a group of images that work sequentially as well as individually, which can be problematic. But I've been looking at them for a long time, even put together a book. So some of the sequencing is important. There was, I don't know if you know the name Alfred Stieglitz or not, but he was a photographer, very important, had a gallery in New York, 291. And at some point in his life, somebody challenged him to make photographs of music. And he did a series of clouds, and he called them equivalents. So they were equivalent of music. And you can look at them and you can, oh, look, that's Beethoven. Oh, look, that's Brahms. And so there's always sort of the metaphoric reference in water for me. And this series connects me to the Zen gardens. There's a sort of meditative process to the water, and the way the water swirls and the way it captures. And there's some control over the exposure, the timing, and the light, but there is an accidental quality as well, because the waves can move very slow, or they can move very fast. And depending on the shutter speed and the timing, it can be surprising. I mean, some of the ones you think don't work, and some that,
And is one of those images behind you? Is that what's on the wall?
It is, yeah. I've just recently made some prints and had a couple of frames made, just because I wanted to look at the frames and see how they looked and see if they matched the vision of how I wanted to present them. So so far I'm really happy with it. So, go ahead.
You mentioned that you've got time to go through, 3,000 images. Talk to us a little bit about your practice. What's different right now during this shelter in? Where are you at sort of with your photography and your art practice?
Well, it's kind of that double-edged sword. One, the isolation gives you the time to concentrate, because the normal shiny objects during the day that pull you away from concentrating on what you do aren't there right now. And that includes, going to a coffee shop and meeting somebody. It includes going to museums. So it has sort of forced me to spend a little more time at the computer. And the process of sorting 3,000, it isn't like you pick 12 out of the 3,000. You get it down to a couple hundred, and then you start putting it in folders of maybe 50 each, and you start, and it's not something you sit down and do at once. You have to do it over time.
Mm-hmm.
You put shows together, selecting the work to go on the walls isn't as easy as people think it is. It isn't just going, oh, let's put this there, let's put this there. Particularly if the artist has a large body of work, you have to find some storytelling aspect to it, sequencing, if you will. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of fun.
Being in hasn't been all that bad for you. I'm glad to know it. And it's nice to have a deadline and something to work toward. Can you walk us through a little bit about how it is you started an art practice, when you started owning the title artist, what your background is artistically?
Yeah, we could talk forever, but I was doing an undergraduate in. I started out to be a medical illustrator, so I was taking art classes and pre-med at the same time, and then that morphed into psychology, because once I got to organic chemistry, I was like, "What is this?" Anyway, so I've always had a camera. I've got a Mickey Mouse camera that I got when I was probably 10 or 11. I've always taken pictures, but it's been a hobby. My brother brought a camera home from the Army, and I used that, and even had an underwater camera when we were like 12 and 14. But this is the last week of my undergraduate study. I had a good friend, Joe, who was an architect, and we're supposed to go have a beer. And he said, well, I'm working on a project. Meet me in the dark room. And I'm like, okay, where's the dark room? So I got there, and he was still working, and he opened the door, and he said, come on, I got a few more prints to make. And I went in the dark room. He turned the red light on. He projected the image from the enlarger on a piece of paper. It was a negative image. Put it in the solution. I watched it come up, and I was instantly hooked.
Oh, that's awesome. Yay, Joe.
I went home. I get goosebumps. I went home, told my parents I wanted to be a photographer 2 weeks from graduating. And they're like, why? And then at that point, with an undergraduate in psychology, you really couldn't get into graduate school. That, now they're more interdisciplinary, that to let people in from anthropology or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I needed to go through a workshop process. And at that time, there weren't a whole lot. There was one in New York called the Visual Studies Workshop. I lived in Cincinnati. And there was one in Louisville. So I went to the one in Louisville. And it was a profound experience. The two gentlemen who ran it had been graduate students with Minor White, who taught at MIT. And he and himself was a Zen practitioner. His approach to photography was very meditative, very centering, which I learned that, and I just thought that was the way everybody learned photography. Mm-hmm. So at that time, photography was just kind of coming into its own, early 70s. So a lot of photographers came through, lots of conversations. I sat in somebody's kitchen and drank wine with Minor White, who sold me a print for $50. It was just a magical experience. But even at that time, I had been attracted to color photography. There were a few people. There was a guy named Ernst Haas, Stephen Shore, Joel Meyerowitz, a few people. But the fine art community at that time was like, oh no, if you're a serious photographer, you do black and white. Mm-hmm. So after spending a year there, I went and worked in a color photo lab for a year to learn the process, to learn how to look at color, because there really wasn't any place in the educational system to go take a class. So I did that for a few years, became a photographer's assistant for a few years, wanted to go to graduate school. Still, the work wasn't strong enough to be quality for graduate school. So I did some teaching at the Cincinnati Art Academy in Cincinnati, and the guy who ran the photo department from Chicago, Cal Cole, and he said, you should just go to the Art Institute for a while. And I'm like, but it's so far away. And he's like, it's 300 miles. It's 300 miles, you know? So I moved here in 1975 to audit classes at the Art Institute.
And there's
and
that's so fun.
It is. And, you know, I had lots of people who perhaps recognize the potential, not currently in the work, but maybe the potential. Barbara Crane, Harold Allen, Ken Josephson. And then I had a good friend who I became good friends with, Alex Sweetman, who taught history there. So all of that morphed, but I ended up at the University of Illinois. They just started their MFA program.
Oh, cool.
And this sounds silly, but I stayed up an entire weekend and did a whole new portfolio from scratch. Turned it in, and I was the first person accepted out of 80. Yeah, no. And because it was the first year of the program, not only did I get a stipend, I got a teaching assistantship. So they basically paid me to go to school.
Go to school there. The first of the 80. That's amazing.
Yeah, and when I get a letter from the Alumni Association, can you give money? I'm like, yeah, sure, absolutely, because yeah, no, it's serious. So, you know, and there were some wonderful people there that, you know, helped me develop a more personal vision, if you will. Mm-hmm. One of those photographers, Joe Jochner, recently passed away, and he came from the Institute of Design, as well as a few other people. So there's this whole, you know, it's the things you bump into and the things that influence you are just astounding in retrospect. So, and I'm still in touch with some of those people all the way back to Louisville. So
awesome.
It's kind of cool.
I totally appreciate your time today. I appreciate you being in the group show and helping Evanston's art scene bubble up. And I look forward to sharing this interview with a bunch of people.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that I'm potentially working on a show, as you know about. And I want to tell people that the Illinois Arts Council gave me a grant. I had no idea I would get it. I just applied for it. I want to prompt people to go to their website, do a proposal, put it in. It's amazing. It's just amazing. And with all the talent in this community that you show and that become part of the Evanston Made, there's got to be more people in there that can get a grant. So
awesome.
More power.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you for your kindness. Appreciate it.